Welcome to Strategy and Strategic Management. So far in this class, we've really focused on more micro-level organizational behavior and management. This is more strategic. What is a strategic management process? Well, strategic analysis is really the P in the POLC framework. If you recall, P is for planning. It involves figuring out who you are, what you're there to do, and what you stand for. And it also includes organizational analysis, both external and internal. So today we'll talk about things like the SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, and Porter's 5 forces. Then once you've established those things, you engage in goal setting. So what are the objectives and goals that need to put into place so that we can achieve our mission and our vision? After that, it really moves to more of the organizing and controlling of the POLC. So allocating resources in order to achieve those goals and evaluating whether you actually achieve those goals and making adjustments as needed. So again, planning really focuses on defining yourself, who you are, and what you want to do. What is your purpose? And it really starts with the mission and vision. And that communicates to all your stakeholders who you are, what you value, what you're there to do. And hopefully that should be aligned with your organizational strategy. That should set into motion what your goals and objectives are going to be, things like leadership and allocation of resources. Again, all stemming from your mission and your vision. So what's the difference between a mission and a vision statement? A mission statement tends to be longer. It really defines what you're there to do. What is your purpose? And it's longer than a vision statement. It's more specific, it's more informative. Actually, I've included, for any of you who want to be entrepreneurs, resource videos under the strategic management module that go over how to create a mission statement, how to create a vision statement, and even coming up with your values. But a lot of companies mix these two up. So a vision statement, unlike a mission statement, focuses on the future. What will you become? What will you be 5, 10 years from now? So not what you're doing now, not what your purpose is. That's the mission statement, which tends to be longer. The vision is short, it's brief, it's usually a single sentence, and it just says what you will be in the future, what you want to become. That in terms helps define your goals and objectives. And this is really the goal setting piece. So again, these should be aligned with your mission and your vision. Goals tend to be more broad in what you're trying to accomplish, and objectives are really just sub-goals. And they define and set out how you're going to accomplish your broader goals. So for example, how will Walmart increase its revenue by 20%? So that's the broad goal. Well, they plan on opening 20 new stores by year end. So one thing that's key is that these should be SMART goals. These should be specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. One thing that hopefully for your paper that you gave some thought to is developing your own personal vision and mission. And it's really important. So we do this for organizations. But now I thought, why are we not doing this for leaders? So you find now that a lot of CEOs, a lot of executives go through this process of what do they want to become? What is their overall purpose? How do they want to contribute? And what that does is help you and ensure that the goals, the decisions that you're making today and the goals that you're setting out for yourself are aligned with your overall mission and your vision. The next part of strategic management really focuses on internal and external analysis. And for internal analysis, we'll focus on SWOT. We'll talk about competitive advantage. And for external analysis tools, we'll focus on Porter and BCG. So SWOT analysis, maybe you've already heard of a SWOT analysis, focuses on, first of all, looking internally. Within the company, what do you do well and what do you do not so well? So those are your strengths and your weaknesses. And hopefully under strengths, you also are able to identify your competitive advantage. A sustainable competitive advantage is something that not only does your company do well, but you do it better than your competition, and it's really hard for others to imitate it. And then you'll identify weaknesses. Then there's the external analysis piece of it. And a lot of people confuse these two. The external analysis focuses on opportunities and threats. So in your external environment, these are not things that you can necessarily control, but they're things that you can impact. So you identify what are things in your external environment. So those might be things related to your location. It could be related to your industry, all sorts. We're going to practice one after this for CSUN, and I'll help you identify some opportunities and threats. And threats, again, are also in your external environment, but these are things that can hurt you. So these are things that you need to be aware of. Once we identify these, the goal is that you capitalize on your strengths, you try to mitigate your weaknesses, you invest in any opportunities that might be out there, and you identify the threats so that you're better prepared. Now let's do a SWOT analysis on CSUN. And normally I would have you do this in class, but if you want, just take a moment to sit there and think about, try to identify some strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for CSUN. So let's look at CSUN now and do a SWOT analysis on CSUN. So what are some things that you might think of as strengths at CSUN? Some things that students have mentioned in the class are things like diversity. There's also affordability. Some students have mentioned resources for students. We also have a really nice campus. We're known to have our business school is very good. Are there other things that you can think of? Some of you might agree, disagree, but maybe our faculty. Faculty at CSUN. What are some other things? I know that some of you guys are part of different student clubs / associations. Those are just examples of some strengths that CSUN has. In terms of weaknesses, one that often comes up is parking. That parking is really tough at CSUN. Other things that students have mentioned are class sizes, difficulty getting into classes, some students have mentioned difficulty in getting a hold of administration. What are some other things that you think of as weaknesses at CSUN? I'm sure there's others that probably come to mind. In terms of opportunities are external, right? So external to actually CSUN. So let's think about more broadly the community, the environment we are in. One opportunity is the alumni. The number of CSUN alumni. So CSUN has a huge alumni group, but they're not as involved. So this is really an opportunity to maybe create some more connection between alumni in the community and the school itself. Other things that are maybe opportunities might be, even when you think about businesses in the local community. We're located in the valley, so one opportunity is for us to maybe build connections with local businesses that would provide opportunities for jobs for CSUN students, and it also might provide consulting opportunities and those types of things, maybe other types of resources. What are some other opportunities that you think we can leverage in our local community or in the external environment more broadly? Some of you might say technology. Maybe there's like a lot of technology that other schools are using that maybe we could integrate, especially now that we're post-pandemic, other technology to make virtual learning better. Any other opportunities that you guys can think of? There's also other universities. So maybe there could be more partnerships or more resources exchanged between CSUN and other local universities. In terms of some threats, the first one that comes to mind for me is fires. That seems to be a big threat. Gas prices, because we are a commuter school, so that's going to affect our university and our students. Competition. So yes, there's other universities in the area. It might be an opportunity, but also it's competition for us. Other threats, things like earthquakes. We've already been through one, or Northridge has already been through one. Online, another threat would be maybe online universities that we're competing with. So these are just some examples. I wanted to include some examples of how you would go through a SWOT analysis. These might be the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats that you were thinking, might not. But one key thing that I want you to understand here is this difference between strengths and opportunities and threats, and being able to understand and identify these for your organization. So what is a competitive advantage? So once you come up with your strengths and your weaknesses, competitive advantage, again, is something, it's one of your strengths, but it's ability to do something so well that it outperforms competitors. And there's all types of competitive advantages. It can be your values, it can be your culture. Some people, for some organizations, it's their people, where the people are the driving force behind the competitive advantage. It could be things like your leadership. It might be your product. So for example, like McDonald's, a competitive advantage is that they can do low-cost food because of an economy of scale. And so they can do really low-cost food. Another example is if, let's say, you're the only hospital within a 30-mile radius, right? Then your location might be your competitive advantage. It's going to be very hard for somebody to enter that market and get all the resources that they need to build another hospital. So your location might be your competitive advantage. So there's all types of competitive advantage, and examples could be technology, cost, quality, knowledge, speed, again, human resources, location. But a sustainable one is one that it's difficult for your competitors to follow or to imitate. Now we're going to talk about the BCG matrix. And it's really a way for organizations to look at their portfolio and determine where they might want to invest resources and where they might want to take out some resources, or where they want to move around, whether they want to move around resources. And what it really looks at is your anticipated growth rate and market share for each of your services or the products that you're making. Anticipated growth rate is how much do you expect the product to grow. Whereas market share really focuses on the proportion of the market that's controlled by a particular product. Like, how big is your product currently? So when we think about this, so let's think about Apple products, right? So Apple products, they have their MacBooks and they have their desktops. They also have iPods, they have their phones, and they have iPads. So when we're thinking about Apple, where do we think these products would go? Well, let's start with the iPod, because I think that's the most clear one, right? So iPod actually, earlier this year, they decided to stop making iPods. Why? Well, nobody was buying iPods, and they had very low growth rate, right? So not only were they not being bought, but they weren't going to grow. So they would be considered a dog. iPods would have been considered a dog. So what do you do with dogs? You get out. You move resources out of that service or product. Then we have the iPads, and iPads a little bit tricky, right? So right now, it's not a ton of market share for them. That's not where they're making most of their money with iPads. But it's a question mark because they're growing, especially with the pandemic. They see some growth with iPads. But again, they're not taking up a lot of market share. So iPads would be more of question marks. And then we have their desktops and laptops, and then we have their phones. And both of those really are their money makers, right? So for both phones and their desktops and laptops, they're high market share. So they're either stars or cash cows. Now, when you think about anticipated growth rate, typically, like, people aren't, you don't expect people to be running to the stores and getting more laptops and getting more desktop. So I would put those under cash cows, right? It's a steady business for them. It's a big business for them. But their phones, because they're constantly coming out with new models, and people, even if you got the 10, now you want to have the brand new one. Those are their stars. They're making more money, and it's continuously growing, even in other countries. So I would put their phones as stars. But you do this in order to figure out, again, where you want to allocate your resources. So this is an analysis of your internal portfolio of your products and resources that you currently offer. Next, let's talk about Porter's 5 forces. So Porter's 5 forces really look at 5 competitive forces that shape strategy. The first one is threat of new entrants. So the idea is, like, in your industry, are there threats that new companies can get into the industry quickly, that you're going to have new competitors? So if you think about a technology startup, the threats might be low because you don't need a ton of capital. And so there you see a lot of new startups starting on a daily basis. Whereas in other industries, it's harder to get into. In a little bit, we'll look at the airline industry specifically, because that threat is low, right? It'd be hard to start a new airline. The next one is bargaining power of suppliers. So when you're thinking about the suppliers, you're thinking about how much power do they have. So for instance, if there is one coffee supplier and that's who you go to, if Starbucks goes to one coffee supplier, that supplier has a lot of power. They have a lot of power to dictate how much they're going to charge you for the supplies, right? So you have to think about things as how many suppliers are there, the size of the suppliers, and is it easy to switch between suppliers? Because again, if you're really relying on this one supplier, it gives them a lot of power, which in turn can really affect your bottom line. There's also bargaining power of buyers. So when you're looking at industries, how many buyers are there compared to how many people offering that product or service? Are buyers doing a lot of little purchases? Is it easy for buyers to substitute one product for another, or one service provider for another? So those are the things that go into how much power the buyers have. Because if buyers have a lot of power, then they can dictate how much your goods or services are how much they're willing to pay for your goods and services. So suppliers affect your costs, buyers affect your revenue, right? And both of those obviously would affect your bottom line. There's also threats of substitute products or services. So when you think about this, think about For instance, driving to school, like let's say cars. What substitute services or products are there? Well, you could take the metro, you could take Uber, you have scooters that you can get, bicycles. All of those are substitute products to cars. So you want to think about not only just in your, like the car industry, but other related industries that buyers would think of as substitute products or services. And these really help you determine like the rivalry or how much competition there is in the industry. So ideally you want an industry that has little competition. It's hard for people to enter that industry. There's few substitute products. And then both the customer and the supplier, they don't have that much power, so that you're sure that you have the power to determine how much money you're making. So let's look at the airline industry, and we're going to think about these few things. We're thinking of new entrants, substitute products and services, supplier power, and customer power. So first, in terms of customers or buyers, there's relatively low threat, right? So even though there might be like a lot of airlines that are competing, the buyer doesn't have a lot of say over the price. So they are highly sensitive to price, and there is uniqueness and branding within different airlines, right? But you have a large number of buyers relative to firms. So it's not like, you have few, that you're competing for few buyers. There's a lot of buyers. And so it doesn't affect each airline substantially. In terms of new entrants, it would be really hard to start a new airline, right? There's so many costs and resources that you need. There has to be licenses and insurance. All of these things go into thinking about a threat of new entrants. One other example of threat of new entrants, let's say you're 16 and you're going to start babysitting, and you realize that there's other kids on your street who are younger than you now, but in 2-3 years, there's going to be a lot of kids that are also going to be at babysitting age. That would be a high threat of new entrants. But in terms of the airlines, it's really a low threat. There's too much capital and too, like qualifications, again, insurance, all of those things needed to enter that industry. In terms of suppliers, it's really important when you think of like Boeing and other suppliers to maintain the relationships with each airline. So that would make that it's a low threat. Also, there's a lot of contracts and industry standards in place, which also make it a low threat. It's not easy also to switch between suppliers. In terms of substitutes, it's a medium threat. Like before, maybe people really relied heavily on the airline industry, but think about even post-pandemic. And even during the pandemic, people started driving their cars. People are like, we're going to do these road trips. So at least domestically, that became more of a threat. Also, another threat is if we have, especially like in Europe, if they have high-speed trains, that's a huge threat to airlines. So I would say it's a medium threat. It just really depends on where you are. According to Porter, this really should help inform your competitive strategy. And Porter really says that there's two competitive advantages: cost and differentiation. So are you going to be low cost or high cost? So there's low cost. So when you think about airlines, maybe Southwest would be low cost, but they also differentiate themselves. So they have kind of a mixed competitive advantage, right? Because they're low cost, but also customer service. They put the customer first. The way that they treat their employees, they differentiate themselves from other airlines. A low cost, which probably doesn't have the differentiation piece, would be thinking of like Spirit Airlines. But other industries or other organizations really focus on differentiating themselves rather than cost. So when we think about target, is target differentiation or price leadership? And this is just what I copied from Target Online, but really thinking about what defines Target. So Target's kind of trying to do both. They want to be affordable, and you see this in their values, so they want to have price leadership, but they also want to differentiate themselves from their competition by having own brands, and they partner with different fashion designers to create their own products. And that it's kind of a combined, just like Southwest, a combined strategy of differentiation and price leadership. So one thing I wanted to highlight and just end the semester with is that you guys are going to have a lot of challenges as you go into organizations, because organizations are constantly changing. And it's really important when you're thinking about strategic management, strategic leadership, to consider the trends that are going on and what future organizations are going to look like. So there's going to be more connectivity, there's going to be more information, more use of data, and how you are able to use that data to better run your organization. Certain things are going to be automated, so you're going to have to think about how that affects how you lead and manage organizations. There's lower barriers of entry. We see this all the time now. So remember, that was one of the Porter's threats. But that's really going to increase competition, right? And it's also going to make it more important that organizations are more organic rather than mechanistic, so that they can really change with the times. So you have these fundamental changes, and it's really important you consider this with future organizations. Thank you guys. Thank you for a wonderful semester. Again, I'm sorry about not seeing you last Tuesday, but thank you, and thank you for your flexibility. I wish you all well, and please do not hesitate to reach out to me.